At the outset, I'd just like to thank the organizers for organizing this wonderful conference. So I'll begin our presentation today. I'm going to discuss these three papers that have come out last year. The first one is obviously on trends of ovarian cancer mortality, and the next two are actually on various treatment options vis-a-vis surgery before or after chemotherapy. So first, let's look at this paper which came out with said global trends and predictions in ovarian cancer mortality. Now, there was a Spanish group which decided that let's take a look at how ovarian cancer has progressed over the years from 1970 till date. So what they did was, before actually getting onto this job, they realized that ovarian cancer has been declining over a period of time, but nothing definite was actually said or written about it. So what they did was they collected all the data from the WHO files from 1970 to 2012. It included 32 European countries, 11 American countries, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, and they standardized the mortality rates of ovarian cancer in terms of per 100,000 women. So if you look at this slide, this looks very busy and very complicated, but to put it in a nutshell, I don't know whether this is, sorry. Right. So to put in a nutshell, these are the individual numbers are ovarian cancer mortality per 100,000, and on this side, what I've written is, or what has been written is all the European countries. There are four major columns here: mortality at all ages, mortality in the young, mortality in the middle age, and mortality at for the elderly. So if you look at European Union in general, the ovarian cancer mortality was about 5.7 per 100,000 in 2002, and which dropped to around 5.1 in 2012, which meant that there was almost a 10% drop in ovarian cancer mortality over the last 10 years, which is good. And this has been more or less reflected across all the EU countries that have been mentioned below that, more so in the northern countries like Sweden, Denmark, and United Kingdom, and less so in some of the southern European countries. What is noteworthy is that if you look at the next column, the greatest drop in ovarian cancer mortality has actually been seen in the young age group, between the age group of 20 to 49 years, where there's been a 20% drop in ovarian cancer mortality over 10 years, which is really, really significant. This drop is much less when it comes to the middle-aged, and unfortunately, if you look at the elderly in Europe have not done well. So the drop in ovarian cancer mortality is just about 2.2%. Of course, there were some countries like the United Kingdom, Sweden, Denmark, where there was an appreciable drop in mortality. Similarly, if you look at the Americas, United States of America has by far done the best, where the ovarian cancer mortality was 4.8 per 100,000 of the population in 2012, and it has dropped by a whopping 16% in 10 years, which is great. More so, there's been almost a 30% drop in the mortality due to ovarian cancer in young women, which is also significant. If you look at the rest of the Central American, Latin American countries, it's been up and down. Some have done well, some have not done well. But the highlight here is that in all the Central American and South American countries, the point mortality or the ovarian cancer mortality at a given point of time in 2012 ranges between 2 and 4.5 maximum per 100,000. Whereas when it comes to the European or the United States of America, the mortalities are almost 5 per 100,000 women, 100,000 of the population. Again, the elderly have done well in the United States of America. The mortality of ovarian cancer has dropped to almost 18%, by 18%. This shows us what happened in Asia and Australia. So if you look at the Asian countries which were there, the Hong Kong, Japan, and Korea, the drop in mortality has not been that much. It's about 6%, 2%, hardly any drop in ovarian cancer mortality. But then again, you have to understand that the per se ovarian cancer mortality in these countries is low. It's between 2 and 3 per 100,000 of the population. Australia and New Zealand directly reflect what's happening in the United States of America, nothing different. So if you were to look at these two graphs, they generally tell us what has happened in the world from 1970 till date, and generally we can figure out that ovarian cancer mortality increased gradually till about 1990s, after which, probably because of newer modalities of treatment, the cancer mortality has steadily, slowly dropped everywhere till 2012, and is expected to drop also till 2020, but the rate of drop is not going to be as steep as it was before. That's expected. So what did we realize? We realized that there was a fall in ovarian cancer mortality rates, especially in Europe and North America. The rates were stable in the elderly, but declined drastically in North America, which was good. This decline has mainly been attributed to the use of oral contraceptive pills. And the way that was reasoned out was in the USA and UK, women who are 70 to 79 years old today and were born in the 30s and 40s were the first generation to use OCs frequently and extensively. And maybe that's one of the reasons why we are seeing a drop in ovarian cancer mortality in these women. There have been some confounding factors also, like death coverage, death certification coverage, or delays in adoption of neomanagement. Moreover, this paper has not really looked at fertility rates, parity, breastfeeding, diet, and obesity on ovarian cancer, how that correlates with ovarian cancer mortality. Another thing to think of is, all those countries where the ovarian cancer mortality was between 2 and 3.5 per 100,000, the rate of drop in mortality was not much, which means that are we reaching a global cutoff or a leveling off whereby 2 and 3.5 per 100,000 is acceptable? We don't know that. We'll have to think about that. Now I'll go to the next two papers, and I'm actually rushing a bit because we're short of time. So the terminologies that we've used in the next two papers is standard: NACT for neoadjuvant chemo, ICS for interval cyto, and so on and so forth. This is just so that I can go on with these terminologies rather than say the full word later on. We do know that ovarian cancer presents mainly in the advanced stages, that is stage 3C and 4, where primary cytoreductive surgery and followed by chemo is the standard of care. But there were these two papers, randomized control trials that came out. One was the EORTC trial by Fairgoat, and one was the CHORUS trial by Kehoe, where they said that NACT followed by surgery is not inferior with respect to PFS and OS, with better perioperative mortality and morbidity in selected patients. So that was a big change. Now, these papers were also criticized because, they said that the median overall survival time, the median operative time, the rates of cytoreduction were not as expected. So there have been criticism on and off. So what do we do next? Next, these two papers were actually meta-analyzed and put together. And therefore, we have this one paper which analyzes all the data from these two trials together. This was actually a pre-planned meta-analysis where the data that I've shown for both these trials were collated and put into one big computer program, and then the results were presented. So what do they say? They said that this results were 1,220 patients who were randomized. Median follow-up was 7.5 years. Stage 3C accounted for about 70% of the patients, stage 4 about 19 to 20% of the patients. Now the median overall survival in both the trials was almost the same, 2.5 years and 2 years. Importantly, the median overall survival with primary cytoreductive surgery and NACT was also almost the same, 2.2 to 2.3 years on meta-analysis. The progression-free survival was also the same, less than 1 year. However, when a subset analysis was done, it was pretty clear that those patients who were stage 4 had better PFS and OS when they received chemotherapy first, whereas those patients who were stage 3C with metastatic tumors more than 5 or less than 5 centimeters in size did better with primary cytoreductive surgery. So now we are getting somewhere in terms of which patients should you operate and which patients you should do chemotherapy on first. Based on this, this is just the conclusion which I've already said. Based on this, the SGO and ASCO actually tried to bring about guidelines which will help us in our clinical practice. So what they did was they convened an expert panel, and they asked this expert panel to actually systematically review literature and give us some guidelines as to how we should actually go about treating our patients with advanced ovarian cancer. So most of the evidence that they looked at was based on 4 phase 3 randomized clinical trials, 2 of which we've talked about and 2 of which I'll just briefly mention. They also looked at a lot of multi-center cohort studies. They looked at single-center cohort studies, which were large. And all in all, what they found was what we already know, that for selected patients with stage 3C and 4 ovarian cancer, NACT followed by ICS is not inferior to, say, primary cytoreductive surgery followed by adjuvant chemotherapy with respect to OS and PFS, with less perioperative morbidity and mortality. But the issue was for selected patients, and that is what we need to look at. Who should be these selected patients for what? So they looked at all this data, and they gave us guidelines for a few questions that we always ask them. Now, these were the trials these were the 4 randomized control trials that they looked at. The first one here, the Scorpion trial by Fagotti, this actually is not yet complete. We do not have PFS and OS data on that, but they did have data on perioperative morbidity and mortality, which almost clearly stated that patients who are receiving neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by interval cytoreductive surgery, the perioperative morbidity and mortality was far less. Similarly, Onda's trial from Japan said the same thing. And again, this trial is not complete. The PFS and OS results are not yet out. And the other two trials, one, the CHORUS and the EORTC, we've already talked about. Right? So the question they tried to answer was, what clinical evaluation should be performed in all women suspected or newly diagnosed with stage 3C or 4 epithelial ovarian cancers? So their recommendation was that all these women should be seen by a gynae oncologist, period. And this was, the strength of recommendation was strong and it was evidence-based. They also said that all these women should have a CT scan with contrast, abdomen, pelvis. If you want to add chest to it, that's good. They said that the use of other tools, like say MRI, of PET or laparoscopy, is left to your own judgment. But CT scan, definitely. The strength of this recommendation was moderate. The next question they tried to answer was, which patient and disease factors should be utilized as criteria for identifying patients who are not suitable for primary surgery, all right, not suitable. So then they came to the recommendation that those women who have high perioperative risk profile, like lots of comorbidities, very elderly and so on and so forth, or those who have a low likelihood of achieving cytoreduction to less than 1 centimeter. Like say those women who've got root of mesentery retraction, very large periportal nodes or something like that. So these are the women who should receive NACT. Again, the strength of recommendation here was moderate. It was not absolutely strong. They also said that these decisions should be made by a team which comprised of a gynae oncologist and a medical oncologist with gynecologic expertise. This was an informal consensus and the strength of recommendation was moderate. The third question they tried to ask us was, how do NACT and PCS, that is neoadjuvant chemotherapy and primary cytoreductive surgery, compare with respect to PFS, OS, perioperative morbidity, mortality, etc., in those patients who are stage 3C and 4, who are fit for surgery and have potentially resectable disease on CT scan. So in these patients who are fit and potentially resectable, can you use NACT or should you do PCS? That was the question. So they said that for these women, you can either offer them neoadjuvant chemotherapy or primary cytoreductive surgery, because we know that NACT is not inferior. But they also said that primary cytoreductive surgery may offer superior survival benefits in selected patients. So that was the recommendation. They further added that all those women, again, you have a high likelihood of achieving cytoreduction to less than 1 centimeter or no visible disease, primary cytoreductive surgery is recommended. Right? They also then went on to say that those women who are fit for primary cytoreductive surgeries but are deemed unlikely to have cytoreduction to less than 1 centimeter, in these patients, neoadjuvant chemotherapy is recommended. So this was again evidence-based, but strength of recommendation was moderate. The fourth question they asked was, what additional clinical evaluations should be performed in all women with suspected or newly diagnosed 3C or 4 epithelial cancers before giving NACT? So here they were pretty clear. Here they said that all women before receiving NACT should have histological confirmation, either by a core biopsy of the ovarian lesion or peritoneal lesions or whatever. They also said that if you do a cytologic evaluation, that is you tap the ascitic fluid and do a cytological evaluation, you should then look at the ratio of CA125 to CEA, and only if it's more than 25, you accept this patient as an ovarian or a genital cancer vis-a-vis other cancers like colorectal. So a biopsy confirmation is a must. The next question they asked was, what is the preferred chemotherapy regimen for women with stage 3C or 4 epithelial cancers who will receive NACT? But this is pretty much standard, and I suppose most people would be doing this. A platinum taxane doublet is recommended. However, they also said that alternate regimens containing a platinum agent may be selected based on individual patient factors. The sixth question they tried to ask was, among those women who are treated with neoadjuvant chemotherapy, does the timing of interval surgery matter? After how many cycles should you operate? What is good, what is bad? So again, here they recommended that the RCTs have tested surgery only after 3 or 4 cycles of chemotherapy, where there's been a good response to NACT or stable disease. Interval cytoreductive surgery therefore should be performed with less than or equal to 4 cycles of NACT. That's what they recommended. Any other timing of surgery has not been prospectively evaluated and may be considered from patient to patient on other factors. The last question they asked was, what are the treatment options for patients with progressive disease on NACT? Well, here again, they were pretty clear, and the strength of recommendation was very strong, that patients with progressive disease have a poor prognosis. These are the patients who may receive alternate chemotherapy regimens, may be included in clinical trials, or they should go on to end-of-life care. There is very little role of surgery, and it's typically not advised. That's what they said, unless for palliative purposes. So these were the 7 questions that that were answered by this paper. We're running out of time. Thank you very much.